Okay, perfect. Okay, I can always edit it out. So, well, we'll just talk a little bit about yourself, the book, obviously Hogan, right?
Yeah, that's neat. And
Yeah,
normal way of processing. Yeah, this
yeah.
is the book. It's been out for several years.
So let me introduce you so that the people that are watching can know who you are. So today we're joined by Mr. Jody Vasquez, author of the book Afternoons with Mr. Hogan. How are you, Jody?
I'm doing fine. Everything's great on this end in Texas. A little humid, a little warm, which you would expect at this time of the year, but everything's on the up and up.
Cool. So you're a native of Texas.
Yes, grew up in Fort Worth. Never really had a reason to leave. When I got out of college, was in the computer industry and started my own computer software company in 1982. Sold that about 7 years ago, and so it's never been a reason to leave Texas. All good.
You've been blessed. That's great.
Totally great.
So let's talk about a little bit about your book, which is really why obviously why we're here. So Afternoons with Mr. Hogan.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah, I this
have a copy.
It was an experience to write. It was an experience to get published, and it's been a wonderful road to travel down. There's a lot of interesting conversations that are in the book. I preface those conversations with really one tone, and that is that if you've never spoken to me or read the book, you wouldn't really know anything about what the book is involved with and the perspective on who Hogan really was. And I'll give you an example of that. Most of the people in our marketplace are familiar with Dan Jenkins, and the author, fabulous guy. He was a native Fort Worth guy before he went to Manhattan and, did most of his writing from there. He moved back to Fort Worth just at the time I finished the manuscript. And obviously, Dan and I knew each other, and he lived about 10 minutes from me.
Okay.
And so when I finished the manuscript, I asked Dan if, in fact, he would read a couple of chapters just to see if the book was worth pursuing. And his comment to me, we were talking on the phone, was, "What could you possibly have to say about Hogan that we don't already know?" So Dan and I knew each other very well. So that was a normal comment from Dan. And I said, "Well, Dan, just read a couple of the chapters and you just tell me." And he said, "Well, I'm in the middle of a couple of projects." He said, "Just bring them by the house and I'll read them." So I drove over to his house. He answered the door. Literally, the conversation went like this. I had the two chapters in a manila envelope. He opened the door. I handed him the envelope and he shut the door. It was literally one of those, kind of like eye contact, thank you, move on. And I was walking back to my car and I was going like, well, okay, this will never happen. So the next morning, Dan calls me and he said, "How many of these stories do you have?" And I go like, "The manuscript is about 400 pages, but it's unedited." And he said, "Okay." He said, "I'm going to get Bud Strait, who wrote Harvey Pinnock's Little Red Book, to call you." And I went and I hung up and I went like, that'll never happen. The next day, Bud Strait calls me and he goes, "I talked to Dan. He said I needed to help you with the book that you're writing because he didn't have the time." And I go like, okay, this is really strange. This time is really strange. So Bud said, overnight me the manuscript. And so I overnighted to him, and Bud called me back, I'd say probably a week later. And he said, "Hey, I'm in the middle of two projects, but I want to do the book." And I went like, wow, this is really, really, because I've never been in publishing. I'm just telling stories.
Right.
So he then says to me, "Yeah, give me about 60 days to do the two projects and then I'll get started on the book." So I said, okay. So we go through the 60 days and he said, "I've gotten two more projects." He said, "I can't do the book. I'm going to send you to Ron Cyrack." And Ron Cyrack, who was with Golf Digest, he said he'll do the book. Well, the sequence of events ended up where Guy Yoakum, who was also with Ron Syrak in Golf Digest. So Guy said, yes, I'll do it because the other guy took his time. And so that's how the book got started. And it was a series of comedies that really, in hindsight, were very entertaining. And Ron put me with his agent, or Guy put me with his agent in Manhattan, the Waxman Group. They got Penguin involved. Penguin said immediately that they would take the book and publish it. And it took them about, I'd say maybe 3 weeks to execute the agreement and get it started. Since I've talked to a number of friends of mine, and they go like, how the hell did you get the book done that quick? And I go, I didn't do anything. I'm just talking to people. They're the ones that are doing everything. Just threw out a manuscript and they took it and ran with it. So that's how the book came to being what it is.
Ironically, the fact that all these heavy hitters got a hold of your manuscript and passed it along to like a hot potato, and they wanted, so the interest in the book was there because all these guys are renowned, authors and people that are within the golf industry at least, and everybody liked it. So you said your first encounter with Dan Jenkins was like he closed the door and you just like walked away, and all of a sudden you get the call the next day. Hey, hold on, this is I'm onto you. You're onto something,
Well, here's a caveat that fits what you just said. So Ron Syrak is an incredible historian, but in a Hogan stance, it is impressive as to what he understands about Hogan, his playing record, and so forth. And Ron said that the impetus here was that Hogan was pre-ESPN. So unless you knew Hogan and knew him from the context that I did, you really didn't know anything about the man. All you knew was his record. And so that's not our world today. Our world today is we want to read your record and then we want to know who you are behind that record. There are not many of us alive today that actually met the man. A fellow wrote a book a couple of years ago about Hogan. It was a biography.
Kurt Sampson?
No, it was after Kurt. I'm trying to remember. It was the other guy. Hang on a second. I've got the book here.
Sure.
James Dobson.
Dobson, yes.
Yeah. So Dobson wrote a book about him, and D. Kelly was the attorney for the estate. And so he authorized Dobson to write. And so Dobson wrote an extensive biography about Hogan, did an incredible amount of research, but he never met the man.
Right.
And so, my comment is always, you can go back and do Wikipedia or whatever and see whatever.
Sure.
Does that really tell you who the guy was? And the answer to that question is no, absolutely not. Unless you talk to me or read my book, you don't know who he was. You don't know how he responded. You don't know the human side of him. And that's what the marketplace wants. They want to know the human side, but they can watch the video and see the rest.
Yeah. I mean, the insight that you provide and the relationship, just shagging balls, in my opinion, and I wasn't there, but Ben Hogan's practice seemed like a pretty intimate thing for him. You know what I mean? Like he protected.
Oh no, absolutely. He never allowed anybody to be around his practice sessions. He didn't want to be distracted. It was his time to do whatever he was working on. So yeah. I mean, he was very private in the sense that he only needed a small gathering of friends. And so he really didn't care about the total audience that was interested in him. He really just cared about the people that were close to him that he would interact with daily. And so if you weren't in that group, he wasn't disrespectful or impolite to you. He just, would shake your hand and wanted to meet him, but then he wanted to move on. He didn't really care about the rest of it. And a lot of great athletes are like that. I mean, in a very true sense, Tiger Woods is like that.
Sure.
I mean, walk up to Tiger Woods in a restaurant and see what you get. I mean, you ain't going to get anything at all. Lee Torino is a very dear friend of mine. You walk up to Lee, Lee will say hi, shake your hand, maybe exchange a couple of comments, and then he wants you to get out of the way.
Wants to
Let
move
him live
on.
his life, and you move on with yours.
Sure.
He doesn't need a best friend.
Well, yeah, and then, like that thinking that when you have the spotlight on you, you kind of want to get away from it. I mean, I would imagine that guys like Lee Trevino, Tiger Woods, Ben Hogan, you want your time, I guess. At the time, your own personal time with people around you is probably more valuable than anything.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
the
sorry.
reality to that is that everybody that comes in contact with you, particularly with that persona, they want a piece of that conversation. They didn't earn it.
No.
They just want to be involved. And there's a barrier there that has to be constructed in order for you at that level to maintain your sanity. Otherwise, I mean, how many numbers have you got in your phone book? Lee will tell you this. This is very common. Lee's got 24 people in his phone book on his iPhone. If when you call him, one of 24 doesn't show up, he doesn't answer. So if you're not on that 24 list,
Yeah,
and Lee'll tell you that. Lee'll take out his phone and he'll say, "Hey, I got 24 on here, and that's all I need."
absolutely. I agree. And I live in a country club. I'm in Dominican Republic right now. I'm from New York. I'll probably be there next week. And I'm surrounded by major league players, major league superstars, like Tatis Jr., these guys that are, they're signing for hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's just like that. They live their life. Nobody bothers them. But that's because we're in a gated environment. The minute they leave out into the general public, then it becomes something else. And I can see how they want to be, protective of their privacy.
Yeah, sure it does. That's just the word.
Yeah.
Sure.
So let's get to so you grew up in Fort Worth,
Yes.
born in Fort Worth, and how did this whole thing go about? I mean, I know I read the book, but how did it go? How did it go about you winding up caddying it?
It was a happenstance. Actually, as I explained in the book, I was in a geometry class in the 10th grade, and a friend of mine across the aisle asked me what I was going to do because we were both on the golf team. And he asked me what I was going to do for the summer, and I told him I didn't have any clue. And he said, "You want to work in a golf shop?" And I said, "Sure." I didn't care. And we went out to Shady Oaks, and Shady Oaks is actually the golf course that Marvin Leonard built. He built Colonial, which is where they play the PGA tournament now. And then in '55, he moved over to an area to the west of that and built a club called Shady Oaks Country Club. Well, what happened was he took about 100 of his friends over to Shady Oaks from Colonial, and then he sold Colonial to the membership.
Okay.
And so it was very small, very tight group. And it actually remained that way until about 1970 when he ended up selling it to the membership at Shady Oaks. But that was the timeline in which he actually made the move between one golf course and another. And then, in fact, Hogan was part of that 100 group that moved over to Shady Oaks. And then this friend of mine worked in the bag room. Back then, because there were only 100 members, there was really in the golf shop the head pro, which was Art Hall, and his assistant Tom Sisolak, and then me. And that was it. And so, as a matter of my job, I swept the floors, put out the clubs, did all the grunt work, picked up the driving range. But when the game sum, which is the noon game, went out, there was really not much to do. So Art wanted me to go out and shag for Hogan because he very rarely played with those guys. He just interacted with them. And as a result of that, I spent a lot of time with him. Because he played probably once, maybe twice a week, but he practiced for 3.5 hours. And so there was a lot of time that I spent over the next 5 years with him. So after that, I ended up joining Shady Oaks joining Colonial when I got through with my college life. And then because of the relationship with the Hogan Company while I was with Hogan and moving forward, I kept up with him socially and became very good friends with he and Mrs. Hogan.
Wow.
Kind of the evolution of my contact with them and what really is the basis of me being able to sit down and write the book that I did. Actually, one of the really interesting parts of writing the book was that when I finished it and it was edited, I was really concerned about publishing it while Valerie and Mr. Hogan was alive, and Valerie was his wife.
Yeah,
So
I met her. Yeah, I met her when Callaway bought the Hogan Company.
yes, Spalding.
Well, they bought Spalding and the Hogan.
Oh, okay.
He had just passed. That's a year earlier. I think he
Yeah,
just passed away. So yeah, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you for 1 second. So you were putting this manuscript together while Mr. Hogan was still alive.
Correct.
Okay, so this goes back to the 90s.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I started writing the manuscript in 92.
Okay.
And the reason I started the manuscript in 92 was that I was, this is another story in the book, but I had introduced Faldo to Hogan. And so on the way back to the airport, John Simpson was Faldo's agent with IMG back then. And so I was taking Faldo and John back to the airport to fly back to London. Nick looked over at me and he goes like, "You need to write a book." And I went like, "I'm not an author." And then John, sitting in the back, said, "You need to write the book and you need to write it in the context of your youth." And I went like, "Well, okay, well, I'll think about it." And so I started that and I was going like, wow. And then about, I'd say probably about 4 months later, because I played a lot of competitive golf. I still do, but I played a lot of competitive. I was at Marion playing with Hugh Wilson, which is an individual 54-hole tournament back then. And I was walking down the first fairway with some guys from Shoal Creek, and my caddy told them that I knew Hogan, and they go like, "Wow, that starts the avalanche of Q&A." And so this guy starts telling me a story, and in telling me that story, I'm looking at him, I'm going like, "Wow, that's my story. How the hell did you hear my story?" And we get to our second shot, and I go like, "Hey, listen," I said, "that's really a funny story. Where'd you hear that story?" He tells me, and I go like, "Okay, well, there's a couple of things that aren't really true about that story." And he goes to me, he goes like, "No, but it's funnier the way I tell it." And I went like, "Well, just you keep telling it the way you're telling it." And then I went back and I go like, "I got to write these things down. They're going to get convoluted from one to the other." So that's where the other side of that happened.
I'm sure you've heard, because I mean, I'm not you, right? But yeah, I'm a Hogan, as you can see, I'm a Hogan fanatic, sort of. Not, there's quite a few people that still follow Hogan and want to swing like Hogan, and you'd be surprised. Generation X, Y, and Z, you're not. I take it you're not on social media. You're not.
No.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many kids out there idolize Hogan, and he was deceased before they were born, and they're trying to, you know what I mean. So he's carried on a legacy, to that point, right? So when you were doing the interview with Greg McHatton, he mentioned something about Golf House, USGA, how they had some club there, it was a G2 swing weight, et cetera, right? So
right.
I'm talking to a friend of mine who's researching Hogan, and he took it upon himself to go visit the museum. And he spoke to the curator, and he said he wanted to see the clubs, and that there was no such club; it never existed. They were all like, in other words, that chart you provided,
right,
is about what Hogan's clubs specs were.
There was a chalkboard in the whole Hogan plant at Pafford. It was funny because the area in which they built the clubs for all the tour players was called a model shop. And that's what we always called it. And there was a chalkboard up there that had all of Hogan's specs on it. And so that's where that chart came from. So yeah, that's what Gene Sheely and Ronnie McGraw built all his clubs off of. The one thing that's missing in that chart and I was talking to somebody, I guess, a few weeks ago. He was talking about how was Hogan able to be so successful in that one trip to the British. And I told him it was really pretty easy conversation. I mean, we had talked about it, many times in the past. But if you look at the Hogan clubs that he played, there was no bounce on those clubs because he was so shallow. And so, and the way I would describe it to you is that if you've got a let's say a 9-iron, the traditional concept of bounce on a 9-iron is it's going to have 9 degrees of bounce. Okay, your 8-iron's going to have 8 degrees of bounce. Your 7-iron's going to have 7 degrees of bounce. Okay, that's just the way manufacturers have done it. Well, that's not the way Hogan's clubs were. Hogan's clubs were built that the 9-iron might have 4 degrees of bounce or 3 degrees of bounce. They were very flat. He didn't need the bounce because he never went steep into the ball. He was always shallow. So he compressed the ball from a shallow position instead of a steep position. And so he never needed bounce. So when he went over there and played, other guys coming from here or guys there had bounce on their clubs because they didn't understand what bounce really meant. And so he didn't struggle with that because he never had the bounce to deal with. And so that's another part of that equation. I mean, it really matters. I mean, every good player.
I agree because, and here, I mean, I've said something that you couldn't imagine how difficult it was for him to win at Carnoustie, right? Because I imagine he played by eye, roughly.
They didn't have any. They didn't have
the flags at Carnoustie were a lot shorter than the U.S. And they played that 1.62 ball, so he had to play that smaller ball into flags that were shorter. Then he must, and he sees post accident. He wasn't getting along with the caddy.
The one thing that I would tell you that maybe people miss in a conversation when you have his level of talent is that when Hogan hit balls, he hit balls through what he called the windows in the air.
Sky, yeah.
Yeah, in the sky. And so he controlled all of the distance from the trajectory. So he could hit let's say he's hitting a 7-iron. If he wanted a 7-iron to go a certain distance, he would either hit it higher or lower. And the trajectory was what told him what the yardage was going to be. And that's the proper way of play. So if you can control the trajectory, you can, if a guy says, hey, you need to be 145, pins 148, and you know that if you hit it at this trajectory, you're going to get 145. And so he was way ahead of the timeline, understanding how to play that. And so there's a lot to that.
So he had this is can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So he wanted his irons to peak at this. What I understand, there was a tree at Seminole that he would hit over and back up whatever the next gap of his irons were and keep it going. And then I was told that there was a similar tree at Shady Oaks where he'd do the same thing. Is that something you're familiar with?
No, he never did that.
Because I even saw a video of a member saying, yeah, that's the Hogan tree there so I guess not.
Not while he was okay. Let me give you this one. There's a lot of guys that talk about I'm going to use this set of clubs, that set of clubs, and all of this, and the conversation just kind of takes its own line. But the real answer is look at the timeline and understand what really matters. Okay, quit playing in 71 competitive. Right. At that point, he continued to still build golf clubs and experiment. But those weren't the golf clubs that he played, and that's not the process that he used to prepare to play.
Right.
So you got to look at prior to 71 to see
what he was doing.
Show me clubs that they say he used, and I go like, I never saw these clubs. I said, when did you get this club? Well, I got it in 1984, and I go like, he was done playing it by then. He was just jacking around, just trying to figure something out. I mean, he would have never put that club in play because that's not what he did. So right. you really got to look at everything in the context of, was he being competitive or was he just messing around? Because he continually tested equipment. But no, you got to look. Okay, there's oh God, I can't remember the player's name. He saw a set of clubs that Hogan, somebody said he used these clubs and they were all 4-iron shafts in every club, tipped differently. And so he asked Ronnie McGraw to build him a set of those clubs. Oh, it was Jonathan Bird. Remember Jonathan Bird?
Yeah. He played Mizuno's though.
Yeah, but he was with the Hogan Company when he first started on tour.
Everybody said he swung like Hogan. That he was. I didn't. Well, I didn't see it. Yeah.
So anyway, Jonathan comes in and tells Ronnie McGraw he liked to have a set of clubs like Hogan. McGraw said, "You can't hit those clubs. You can play with those clubs competitively." He said, "I'd like that tri-set." And so McGraw built him a set. And so at Phoenix, he had built him a set. And a couple of weeks later, he was at Phoenix and he walks in the trailer in Phoenix and he hands McGraw the clubs and he said, "I can't hit them." He said, they're really not very good. And McGraw said, "Yeah, I told you."
Yeah. Well, so let's get into the book a little bit. I want to ask you a question. So there's a point there where a female member at a club gives Hogan a box of balls.
Yes. Amelia Goldthwait.
Sorry?
Her name was Amelia Goldthwait.
Okay.
She and her husband, Frank, were the Toro distributors.
And
so
this is
that was the relationship.
But the club you mentioned, the country club they were in, what was it?
Rivercrest Country Club, which was the oldest club in Fort Worth, or still is.
Okay, so Hogan was caddying at Rivercrest.
Correct.
So there is never, this is the first time I've ever heard that he caddied anywhere but Glen Garden.
Correct.
So see that's a little tidbit. Unless you mentioned that, guys, people would have never known that.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because Ms. She was a fairly good golfer, not a great golfer. And one day we were standing in the golf shop and we were just kind of talking back and forth. And she started telling the story about when she first encountered Hogan. Yeah, she said that he was caddying out at Rivercrest, and he knew that she was the Toro distributor. She and her husband Frank, but they were also the Wilson Golf Club Company distributors for the North Texas area. So she said Hogan asked if he could get some golf balls from her. And so she said, yeah. So she brought him a dozen golf balls. And then she said they played that morning and she saw him hitting balls. And she said she and Frank came back that evening to have dinner at Rivercrest and he was still out there hitting balls. And then she said that he showed up at their office about a month later and she said, "Ben, what can I do for you?" And he said, "I was hoping you could give me some more balls." And she said, "What, did you lose the ones that I gave you?" He said, "No, they're here." And he showed her the box of balls and the balls were all worn out, but all 12 of them were there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not a fable.
The only thing I don't know, and I didn't ask her, was how old he was back then. But I would say he's probably in his teens at that point, you know, when he was shagging. Because he and Royal Hogan, he caddied, and then to make more money, they delivered papers or sold papers downtown Fort Worth when they were in that age bracket as well. They used to go get papers, sell them on the corner, to make money for that kind of life. I mean, that's the way you just figured out back then, you know, how you stayed alive.
You got to hustle. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. You never had the golden spoon.
Yeah. I mean, that's fact of life. That's how, you know, we all kind of, I mean, so now you said the shot that you saw Hogan hit, that short pitch shot. Yeah,
that's the greatest shot I've ever seen.
You describe it?
Yeah, when he was getting ready to go and play, he was the first green, which has been changed now on the little nine. There's a 9-hole complex in the middle of the back nine at Shady Oaks, and the first hole, it had probably a 5, maybe 6-degree slope on the back of it. It's probably from the tee hitting into the green was probably about 75, 80 yards. But he would stop above the green about 40 yards and chip down to the green. And just to practice, shots coming in because, like at Augusta, you're playing to those kind of positions. He hit the most incredible shot. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny because I talked to Faldo about this. And when we went out to Colonial or to Shady Oaks to have lunch with Hogan, Faldo said, "Can you take me out there?" And I said, "Sure. I'll show you where you." This is before they renovated it. And so Faldo took his club out there and we hit those shots. And John Simpson and I were standing there by the area, and Faldo would hit a ball and he said, "What did that ball do?" And he'd hit it. He had probably about maybe 12, 15 balls into that area. And we go like, "Nah, that one just kind of bounced forward." But this particular shot that he hit, it backed up the slope probably 2 inches, maybe 3 inches at the max. But he had so much spin on it that it just came back. And I remember walking over to him when he was done, and I went like, "Do you realize you backed that ball up that slope?" And he went like, "Okay." And it was like, "Yeah, I can do that." I was going like, I could sit there the rest of my life and never do that.
Right. See, you spun it to the point where it defied gravity. It just came back.
Absolutely.
So you're familiar with the 1960 U.S. Open
Sure.
the one in Denver?
Yeah.
Cherry-
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I
Okay,
played the golf course many, many times.
So he lost that Open probably because he spun it off the green.
That was the one golf shot I'd heard him say many, many times that he regretted. And what he miscalculated was the distance behind the pin that he was going to throw the ball. It wasn't that it had spin.
False front.
No, it's a very flat green at that left pin placement. And then you get into the rock area. And what happened was he hit it probably about 5 steps short of where he should have carried it, and it would have stayed on the green. But where he hit it short of the pin about 2, maybe 3 steps, it was going to just come back in the water.
Wow.
And he just hit it with so much spin, but he just miscalculated the carry of the ball. And yes, he totally, I think of all the golf shots that he's ever commented on, that's the one that just killed him. He couldn't get over that one.
Yeah, that probably haunted him.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 conversations that tie into that. Number one conversation is that he seriously believed that he won 5 U.S. Open.
The hell, America.
Yeah, because if you look back at the field and you look back at the circumstance, the only thing that didn't happen was the USGA didn't recognize that as a U.S. Open. But all of the steps of qualifying, all of the field activity, all of the process of conducting the event, it was a U.S. Open. He just didn't get. And if you look at the medal,
the medal's almost the same.
Yeah, well, there's a color. There's a color in the medal that doesn't match the other medals. But no, he would tell you, as a matter of fact, it was so funny. The very first question that Faldo asked him when we were sitting in that meeting was Faldo leaned on the table, on his desk and asked him the first question. He said, "How do you win the U.S. Open?" And Hogan, he always sat in his chair kind of like this, and he leaned forward and he says, "You just shoot the lowest score." It was funny because everybody started laughing that was there, at his desk. And Hogan looked over at me, and I immediately quit laughing. He didn't say that to be funny. And then He held up his hand like this to Faldo across the table, and he said, "I've got 5 of them." He said, "That's when it's open, you shoot the lowest score."
Right.
Yeah.
It's a logical answer. I mean, Faldo was probably looking for some insight or some strategy or something. Said, "No, just shoot the lowest."
You just shoot the lowest score.
Right, right. That must have been interesting though, because Nick Faldo in his day was close to the equivalent of Hogan in his mannerisms and the way he carried himself.
Well, the funny part about that one, this is, I don't know if it's in the book or not, but Faldo asked Hogan, he said, "How do you deal with the media?" And Hogan, I could give you a lot of stories about this, but Hogan said, "I don't talk to the media." And then Faldo turned over to John Simpson and said, "We got to quit talking to the media." And John Simpson said, "No, no, 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 we can't do that."
Different times, right?
We can't do that one.
Oh, cool. Oh, so as you're going out watching, I mean, I have tons of videos of Hogan and stuff, but watching him in person, right? That must be so totally different experience, you know?
Well, this was a running joke. Jim McLean. Okay, Jim, his son, I can't remember his son's name. His son played at TCU for about 2 years here in Fort Worth. And so Jim would come into town, and when he'd come into town, I'd run into him over at Colonial, or somehow we'd connect and visit. And Jim was making that CD of Hogan that he did. It was
Hogan.
different
Yeah.
CD. It's
Yes,
very
yes.
good. And Jim would ask me questions about, different things that he was pointing out. And my running joke with Jim was, "Jim, it's one thing to see it in video. It's a lot better to see it in person." I said, it's different in person. And we would just kind of laugh about that.
Can only imagine that.
Well, here's the deal. I would have friends of mine say that Hogan always cut the ball. And I go like, "No, that's not true." And they would go like, "Yeah, he always cut the ball." I said, "No." They would show me a picture of him and say he's standing up and he's going to cut it. And I said, "You see the ball?" And they go like, "No, it's a picture." And I said, "Well, then how do you know what he was trying to do if you don't watch the ball? The ball tells you everything." Think of Scheffler. Now, so Randy Smith is a very dear friend. I've known Randy for 50 years.
Right.
So watch Randy when he's standing with Scotty. And when Scotty hits the ball, Randy looks up and watches the ball because he wants to see what the ball's doing to be able to tell Randy, okay, what you were doing didn't make the ball do what you were wanting it to do. Or, yes, that was good. So if you don't see the ball, how do you know what the player's doing? And so the video is, I mean, you can look at Hogan's position or any player's position, but if you don't see the ball, you don't know what it's doing. They're not disconnected.
Right. They are totally connected. And what I find the most impressive about Ben Hogan was his pivot. He had a very dynamic move, through the ball. So, his shoulder turn, his hips, he had his body. I mean, considering the amount of injuries he had, right? The amount of the stuff, all the injuries he sustained as a result of the accident, he still put a good move on it,
Well, you got to take it back to the concept of what he was trying to accomplish in his golf swing. His golf swing was all about controlling the face angle of the club, because if you don't have control of the face angle, then you can't control the ball. That was his primary directive. So that then means that you have to have balance. Think of it like the best analogy I could give you is like a pitcher. In baseball, if the pitcher's out of balance, the ball's not going to go where he wants it to go. He's got to be in total balance in releasing the ball. So Hogan was all about balance. So his directive was to take to the top of the backswing in balance so he could return the club face in balance. And so he really wasn't enamored with, I'm going to hit it this far. He was enamored with, I'm going to hit it to this point. And how do I do that? And that's how you beat people.
Right.
And it's true today. I mean, look at the comment. It is so funny to me. Everybody is enamored with Scotty Scheffler's ability to hit a golf ball where he wants it. And I go like, excuse me, that's the point of playing.
It's the nature of the game.
Unless you don't care whether you're going to beat somebody or not. I mean, if there's the pin, how do I get it to the pin? Yeah, there's all kinds of analogies. Luke Donald.
Yeah.
Okay, Luke Donald came out of Northwestern, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, this is relevant to the Hogan conversation. So Luke Donald is signed by Nick Rafael, and this is in the Spalding time frame, right?
Okay.
So the first time I see Luke Donald was at Houston playing in the Houston Open. And so Luke Donald is standing there, and I'm on the tee with Ronnie McGraw and Nick Rafael. This is the first tournament he's playing out of college. And so it's totally unimpressive. I mean, he's hitting balls that I could hit. We're on the driving range. The balls are going out. They're not bullets. They're not incredibly high. They're just golf shots.
Normal golf shots.
Yeah. And I'm going like, okay, I play with guys all over Texas that hit these kind of shots. So I'm not impressed. Gary Nicklaus walks over and drops his bag of balls just behind Luke Donald. And Gary back then looked like a linebacker for the NFL.
He looked like a little bear.
And he hits his ball just like his dad, just straight up in the air with huge velocity. And it's incredibly impressive. So he's standing there hitting these balls, and Luke Donald's hitting these balls. And I'm going like, how is this guy going to play that guy? So Ronnie McGraw calls me on Saturday morning. The trailers leave on Wednesday.
Right.
So he calls me on Saturday morning. He said, you seen the paper yet? This is, this is in print. This is years ago. Yeah. And I go like, no, I haven't seen the paper this morning. He said, go get the paper and call me back. So I went and got the paper. I look on there. Luke Donald is one shot off the lead in the Houston Open after 36 holes. Gary Nicklaus missed the cut by 4 shots.
Wow.
And I go, it's pretty true.
Yeah. This is he's with Spalding now, right?
Yeah.
Spalding Hogan.
Yes. If you look at it, this is a pretty interesting conversation. The guys that were in the model shop or the guys in the pro shop, when Spalding bought Hogan, they transitioned into the Spalding shop, and the Spalding clubs became Hogan clubs. You can look it up. Now, Callaway buys Spalding. Well, all of a sudden, when Callaway buys Spalding, remember Spalding used to have a huge offset toe, or Callaway used to have a huge when Hemstetter was there, they had the huge
Richard Hemstetter, yeah.
Drivers were horrible and everything. So when when Callaway buys Spalding, they bought them for the ball brands and the ball patents. But then the players started using the Spalding clubs because they wanted to get away from that crappy stuff that the Callaway had. And so if you look at it today, Hogan, the Spalding, the Callaway is still Hogan because all of the clubs can trace back to the Hogan design.
And the one club they're selling is the Apex. They kept the Apex name.
Yeah, they pushed everything else to Perry Ellis when they sold the brand. Yeah.
They kept the Apex name.
Yeah, it's totally a Hogan mystique that moved forward in that conversation.
That was great. Yeah, I remember because they had the Top Flight Tour. They had some really good clubs. They had Payne Stewart on staff, Trevino. They had some good players. Top Flight.
Well, here's a funny one. Hogan would always say we got 2 Iron Byrons in our operation. We got the mechanical guy, and then we got me. So if Sheely built the club, worked on the mechanical Iron Byron, and then Hogan got it and he liked it, then they liked the club, and that's the one that went to market. For that, Hogan, this is not derogatory, Lee will tell you.
A little Mexican boy.
Hogan had so much respect for Lee that he would say to Sheely, hey, I like these clubs, send them over to the Mexican kid in Dallas and let me hear what he says about them. So Lee will tell you that he would get clubs from Hogan, and then he would call Sheely and say, "Yeah, these are good," or "I'd tweak this," or "I'd tweak that," and then they'd go to production with him. So Hogan had an enormous respect for Lee as a player.
Yeah, I saw where Trevino said, send it over to the little Mexican boy in Dallas. He's the only one who knows how to hit a golf ball.
Yeah.
And then, they said that Hogan would sit there and watch him, and he'd make this distinct sound. So I guess Hogan liked it. He said, "Yeah, this guy."
Well,
he said, "I make this distinct sound." And Hogan was like, "Well, that's good."
no, that's real.
Yeah, but he's another guy who dug it out of the dirt and figured it out, and I have a lot of respect.
Well, Lee's comment is, "I'll take a lesson from somebody who can beat me."
You can beat me, yeah. You want to give me a lesson? You got to beat me first. So you spent your how long were you at Shady Oaks?
Probably about 5 to 6 years.
From what year to what year?
69.
Okay, so you were there when he made that nice run at the Masters in 66, 67, yeah.
One of the interesting things about Augusta was that the one thing he did was on 12, he always said when he stood on the tee on 12, you know how the wind gusts at Augusta on 12. He always said he'd tee up his ball, and this is if it was windy. He said he wouldn't hit his shot until he felt the breeze hit his chin, and then he knew that the gust had just happened, and then he'd hit his shot. So he had the mental presence to stand over the ball and wait till he felt the gust on his chin, and then he'd go ahead and make his swing, because he knew that gusts don't happen like all the time. There's a lag, and so he would hit a shot. It's pretty scientific.
He's also the guy that came up with, I'm not sure if it's 12 or 16. You can see the flag on one of the par fives, and they're not in sync. So if it's there's like a gully, it comes into 12 from is that the par five that's adjoining it? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, 15.
There's two visible flags, 12 and 15. So
no, you're talking about 12 and 13.
12 and 13, yeah.
Yeah.
And he would watch both, like he knew the synchronicity between the two flags and the wind and all that. It was like, wow. It's like, and today there's still guys trying to figure that. They would look at the flag at the.
Well, I'll give you a caveat that he actually, I was shocked. He spent a lot of time. His normal meetings when he was meeting with somebody was probably 15 minutes. I mean, if you went past 15 minutes, that was amazing. But when Faldo and I were with him, we were there for almost an hour. I was shocked at some of the things that actually said to Faldo, that I was going like, wow, I can't believe you're telling him that. Because Faldo pressed him on prepping for majors, and he went through a dialogue about preparation. And what he said to Faldo is, he said when he got to the golf course, he said he didn't really hit balls to practice because he'd already practiced. He said what he did is he would mentally go through the golf course, and he would, like, let's say you're hitting your 8-iron. He would say, okay, I'm going to hit an 8-iron on number 3 to the left front position. So this is the shot I'm going to hit. And on 16, I'm going to hit an 8-iron to the back right position. So this is the shot so he would rehearse every shot prior to going and starting the tournament, so that he felt comfortable with the shot that he expected to hit when he played. And so when he hits the 1-iron at Marion on 18, he had already hit that shot before mentally when he was practicing before the tournament. So it wasn't like, oh my God, I got to hit this shot. He was going like, I've hit this shot before. And that's huge mental preparation.
Yeah, that's what he said that in, I'm not sure if it was the ESPN interview or the Ventura interview, that he would play. See, he says when I got out there, there wasn't any pressure because I had already played this hole. So he knew exactly what he was going to do. And, if he knew the pin placements, that would certainly be an advantage. Surprised that he would divulge spend that much time with Faldo, you know, and give him
I was
opening up like that.
Yeah, I was surprised. As a matter of fact, David Huber, who worked under Dean Beeman
Mhm.
when Beeman was uh, uh, the
Commissioner,
head of the PGA. Huber
commissioner,
worked for him, but then Huber left and became president of the
Hogan
Hogan
Company.
Company for
Yeah.
about 3 years. And so Huber walks out when I brought Faldo over, and he goes like, "Hey, we always used to refer to Hogan as the old man internally."
Uh-huh.
And so he said, "Hey, I brought the old man up to speed on who Faldo was." And I went like, "Great." I said, "Why don't you come in the meeting and you and I can kill the dead time and make it stretch out the time of the conversation." And so Huber sat on one side of Hogan's desk, I sat on the other, and then Faldo and John Simpson sat in front of him on the desk. And it really did help because Huber would talk to me or we'd talk to Hogan, and that conversation, it's kind of like a round table.
You were able to
And
get it
so,
going.
yeah, yeah. So that's one of the ways that meeting got stretched out to where it would have never, if Hogan had walked in with just Faldo and John Simpson, it'd have been a 15-minute meeting and never been what it ended up being. So
Cool.
yeah.
So I have a Hogan story from that 67 Masters. George Archer was paired with Hogan and Palmer. And I know Palmer and Hogan didn't see eye to eye or didn't like each other. And I guess Archer said that, he had Arnie's army and all this brouhaha going on. And Hogan was like getting annoyed. So he lights up. He just steps up. Palmer did his usual swingling and, try to hit it as hard as he could. And Hogan steps up and just rips one. And Archer's with him, and he's like a rookie or something. And he hits his tee shot, and he's away, obviously. He goes up, and they all walk up to where Archer's ball is. Archer hits his. Then Hogan and Palmer kept walking. And there was a ball in the fairway, and there was another ball further down. And they both walked past the ball. And they kept going, both of them. Archer said, whoever has to turn back is going to be pretty embarrassed. Palmer had to go back. He's that was one of those anecdotes I read. Wow. In other words, he had another 20%, 25% in reserve he could use, he just, I guess,
Now there's a hole on Shady Oaks that's a par 5. It's the dog leg right, and it's the Shady Oaks Hogan Valley. It's to the right in the middle of some live oak trees, and you couldn't hit your ball straight enough to gap the trees. But if you gap the trees, the hole's probably about 590. If you take the quarter where Hogan hit it, it was probably played about 500. But you had to squeeze it through an area that was about, I'd say no more than 15 yards. And so he could hit it through that area every time and end up with a 200-yard shot into the green. And so there was a guy from California that really irritated him one day. And the guy was going like, "Where do you hit it here?" And Hogan didn't say anything. He just teed his ball up and he hit it. And it looked like he hit it into a forest. And so he hit it down there, and then he went and sat in his cart. And the guy goes like, "It doesn't look like there's any way to hit it there." Go like, "No, he hits it there. You hit it over here." And the guy did.
Wow. So you do your little tenure there at Shady Oaks and then you move on. And what comes next
Yes.
in your
Sure.
what did you do after you left?
After I left Shady, I started working in the computer industry, and I was a marketing guy for Honeywell, Sperry Univac for a number of years. And then we started my software company, which developed software for the oil and gas industry. So we had that company for about 40 years, and then I sold it about 7 years ago. So,
Okay.
That's been my lifestyle prior to after leaving Shady Oaks. But
And-
during that time, being obviously with my Hogan contacts and being involved with him so closely, I kept touch with him and with Valerie. And of course, people were always asking for me to go over and get something signed or go over. And I'd go over and visit with him randomly just out of courtesy. And I mean, I enjoyed being around the guy. So it was fun. And obviously, after he sold the Hogan Company, not obviously, but after he sold the Hogan Company, I really spent probably more time with Valerie and talking to her, which was wonderful. She was a very, very nice lady. And it was semi-embarrassing because when she would see me socially, she would call me Mr. Vasquez. And I would go, Miss Hogan, I'm sorry, I'm the kid that used to shag for your husband.
Yeah.
You can call me
That
Jody.
just shows how classy she was. I think
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she was
yeah.
a wonderful lady to talk to.
But you're going through that, and I mean, at that age, 10th grade, starting out, a guy like Hogan would be very impressionable on somebody young, right? Would you say that? Can you attribute any of your? I mean, you've been pretty successful in your life, your personal life. Would you say that period might have had something to do, or you might have carried over something or lessons or learned from
I think there's a very pointed story in the book that I get asked in that context several times. So one day he's hitting balls and he's just hitting sand wedges. And let's say that in warming up in a practice session he hits like 15 balls. Well, he hits probably 30. And there's a point in time where you go like, wait a second, what's going on here? All of a sudden he normally hits 15. Now he's hitting 30. So what's the issue? That's going through your mind. And so on the cart going back to the clubhouse, I go like, I hit a lot of sand wedges today. I said, why'd you do that? And he goes like, the club just didn't feel right in my hands. And I kept trying to hit shots and I couldn't get comfortable hitting the shots. He said, so finally I got to the point where it felt comfortable. And then I went back and got another club. And I jokingly just kind of giggled. And I go like, oh God, if I did that, I'd never get off a sand wedge. I hit like 10 bad sand wedges and I just drop it on the ground and go get another club. That wasn't him. And so he stopped the cart and we were about to go across the bridge going to the 18th green at Shady. And he stops the cart and he looks over at me and he says, why would you do that? And I was going like, this is a good point. This is a point where he's trying to mentor me. And so I go like, I don't remember saying anything. He said, if you're not going to be able to do what you're doing right now, why would you go and do something different? And it was pretty strong.
Yeah. It came across right away. It was clear as day.
Yeah.
Okay, now I see it.
I got that one.
I see your point.
Yeah, if you can't do what you're doing right now, then why are you going to do something different?
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about The Secret. You're one of the few guys he's divulged the secret to, but probably the only guy.
I've had so many guys come to me and I had one guy, this is funny, this is years ago. I can't even remember how long ago. I had one guy come up to me and say, well, this is BS, you're making this up. And I go like, okay, I tell you what I'll do. I said, I'll write a check for $100,000 and we'll take a lie detector test. You write a check. You write a check for $100,000, and if I pass the lie detector test, I get your check. If I don't pass the lie detector check, you get my pass. And he went like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I said, okay, well then what's the point of this conversation? Oh, did it really happen? Did this conversation in I think it's like chapter 6 of the book. Yeah, I think it's chapter 6. Yeah, it is chapter 6.
I have the Kindle.
Yeah, that really, really did happen. And it was a weird event in the context of, okay, everybody else in their life has had a point in time when they just want to share something. You know, you don't want to broadcast it. I don't want it to go out on social media, but I need to tell somebody. And that was the moment that we're talking about. And so when he came up to the, you know, this area on the little nine, and he takes 3 balls out of his bag and drops them on the ground and hits them. You know, I'm just sitting there like this on the cart. We just been shagging for 2.5 hours, and he hits these balls up there, and then he looks over at me, and he goes like, "You want to know how to hit the ball like that?" And of course, they were all perfect. What are you going to say? No, I'm sorry, I'm tired.
I'd rather hack it up, but
What are you going to say? I go like, yes, sir. You know, I'm probably at that point, probably about 17, 18 years old. And so I said, yes, sir. And he reaches in and he grabs 3 balls out of his bag and he drops them on the ground. And then he hands me his golf club, or he holds his golf club out. So I get out of the cart and I walk over there. And so I grab his golf club. Now there's a creek about 10 yards in front of us. And I'm going like, holy shit. I'm sitting here. I've got tennis shoes. I've been shagging balls. I've got no glove on. I'm just sitting there. And so my thought process was, I don't want this club to come out of my hand, and I don't want to blade a ball or shank a ball. I mean, how much pressure would you feel in that environment? And even though I had known him for like 4 or 5 years, it's still a lot of pressure.
scary.
Somehow I hit all 3 balls, but I hit them over the back of the green. And he's sitting on his cart and he's smoking a cigarette and he's looking at me and he goes like, "That's really good, but you hit them too far." And I was going like, I'm just glad I got them over the creek. I didn't care where they went. I was just glad. And so then I go to him, I look over at him and he goes like, pauses, and I go like, "Okay, so is that because you cuffed your wrist?" Or I don't remember how the conversation exactly started, but then he begins to describe to me what he does with his golf swing. And the key element in that was the right knee and how he controlled his right knee to transition from the backswing to the downswing. And so if you control your right knee and you maintain flex in your right knee as you go back, then you've got better balance coming down into the ball. And so therefore you can control the club face. And that's what he did. And so if you look at good players today, like somebody said, you remember Tom Byram?
Sure.
Tom Byram, I worked on the driving range for 40 years at Colonial, running the driving range. And somebody walked over to me one time and said, "Hey, Tom Byram's swings just like Hogan, and come watch him." And so I walked over and I stood there and I watched him and I go like, "Nah, he didn't swing anything like Hogan," and just walked away. And they go like, "He swings just like Hogan." I go like, "Well, you obviously don't understand how Hogan swung." And the deal is, if there's, I've never seen it, but if there's video on Tom Byram, he straightened his right leg
Right
going
leg.
back, and then he collapsed it going forward, and it was fine. I mean, he did very well as a player back in those days. But the deal is, Hogan didn't believe that allowed you to do the balance that he wanted. And so his conversation was, keep your right knee flexed going back, and you do that with a cupping of the left wrist, and then you can return the club with balance. I actually asked him, I said, "Well, you talked about the cupping of the wrist in the Life magazine article."
Yeah.
I said, why did you talk about the right knee? And he said, "I wasn't going to tell him everything." And that fits. I mean, Trevino's got a number of things he does with a swing that you would not know about.
Right.
And I made a mistake one time of telling a friend of mine what Lee did. It got back to Lee, and Lee cussed me for 30 seconds.
Went ballistic.
Don't ever tell anybody what I tell you. Let them figure it out. And so that's the premise that great players, I mean, let them go figure it out on their own. This is a very competitive world. But Hogan's right knee, and I struggle with it. If you look at the published date on the book, it was after he died and after Valerie died, because I was going like, there's no way I could write the book and include that with, but
While he's still alive. No, that wouldn't be the
yeah.
right thing. You did the right thing.
But here's the dilemma that you always deal with. If he didn't want it out, why did he tell me? You know, at some point he was going like, okay, this is what I do. So why wouldn't I tell somebody? But the caveat to that session was that he pointed to me and he told me, he pointed his finger at me and he said, don't tell anybody this. So now I'm in the golf shop. He signed my caddy ticket, you know, for my 750. And Tom Sisolak, the assistant pro, is leaning over the counter and he goes like, hey, anything happened special today? And I went like, no. It was one of those like I started to say, you won't believe what just happened. I went like, no, I can't do that. So I just sat on it.
Right out of the bag. Now,
Yeah.
you shared that with Faldo.
I said, what?
You shared that with Nick Faldo?
Okay, so here's where that came down. Faldo and I are talking, and I'm going like, I haven't written this or done anything with it. And so I go like, you know, if I get hit by a train, this thing's going to die. This will never go forward. And this is before the book was published. And I said, Nick was going like, what did he do? What were his practice sessions like? What's all it? And I went like, okay, I'm going to tell you something, but you've got to promise me that you will never tell anybody until after he's dead. And then you can say whatever you want. And I said, if you can't promise that, I said, I'm not going to share this with you. And so he said, okay, go ahead and tell me. And Fanny, remember Fanny is, yeah, so she was there. And so we go through this. This is on like a Monday evening, Tuesday evening at Colonial during the tournament. And so we go through this and I explain it to him. And so we then fast forward a year. I was on the driving range. Faldo was playing again, and he was on 11 green. And he sent somebody back out to the driving range to get me. Wants me to come out to the golf course and talk to him. Let's just say it's a Tuesday. And so I got on the cart. I drove out there to where he was, and I'm walking up on the putting green on 11, the par 5 at Colonial. And I walk up, and he goes like this, and he goes like, it don't work for me. And I said, Nick, he never said it was supposed to work for you. It's what he did. If you can't use it, it doesn't matter because he doesn't give a shit. So, yeah, take it or leave it. I don't care. You went silent on me. I can't hear you.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I got this mute button so I don't interrupt you. But there's a story out there, and it's regarding his book, 5 Lessons. Some guy goes up to Hogan and says, oh, this isn't working for me. I just don't know what it is. He said, look, I wrote that book to describe how I play golf.
That's the way it is.
That's exactly what he told the guys. Look, I wrote it. They asked me how I did it. I said, this is how I do it. This is what works for me.
And that's the way it should be.
Sure. I got a couple of questions and then we can, because I'm really enjoying this, but have you ever considered putting this in an audio format?
You know, a couple of guys have talked to me about that at a man.
I think it would be a home run. I mean, you could. It would be one of these things that you could listen to because it's a story. It's not like, you know, it's like you go, wow, you know, you can be driving. It's a soothing, it's a really relaxing book to read. You know, the anecdotes, the little stories. I think that if you put it on Audible, you read it yourself. You know, you're retired now, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm. If you can say kids will let me retire, the answer is yes.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah. No, I've just never thought about it. I've had people. I actually had the guys at the Golf Channel get a hold of me, and they wanted to make a series of the book in terms of each chapter being, you know, a 30-minute, you know,
segment
or whatever. Yeah. And I met with them down in Miami a few years back, but nothing. We just never did anything about it. So
Mhm.
yeah,
So
but
can you show us the book again so that people can see it?
absolutely. Yeah.
It's available on Amazon and everywhere else, actually, right? Anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
Now you're a pretty competitive, or still are competitive amateur yourself, no?
I do play a lot competitively, yes. And the answer is I haven't developed the yips in
Yet.
terms of putting, and my chipping's okay. My distance is horrible, but yeah, I still compete. I play in a lot of the Society of Seniors, Golf Week, senior events, probably about 14 to 16 events a year. So yeah, it's fun to do, and we have the putt master, which is I've created a relationship with Orange Whip about a year ago, and we've taken the putt master, which is actually a putting training aid that that Hogan actually instigated. If it hadn't been for him, I would not have done it. And it's a training aid that allows you to use to maintain wrist connection and shoulder connection.
And it slips on the top of your putter.
Yes, your putter sits right here.
It's right there, and you just put that along the side of the back of the grip, of the side of the grip.
Yeah, just like this.
Oh.
And then you make this motion, and it keeps you from flipping your wrist.
Right.
Get your shoulders active, parallel. But it's called a Putt Master.
Cool.
You can look up the Putt Master on Amazon, or you can go into PGA Superstores.
I've seen you on YouTube with it, so they can go on YouTube and watch you in action.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's very functional.
And you can it's collapsible to where that portion can.
This button allows you to move the width of your arms. So yeah,
I probably would have put a clamp on it somewhere lower to keep it from slipping. And you put on okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
It's a nice looking device.
They've done a great job with the profile of it, but yes, it's done very well. We launched it about a year ago, and it's been in design for years. And it actually happened because a friend of mine had done a similar device, and Hogan didn't like it. He told me why he didn't like it. And after he told me why he didn't like it, I went back and created this, and I brought it back over to him, and he said, "Yeah, I like that one."
That's great. That's great. I mean, it's keeping you busy.
Sure. Yeah, we all got to have something to do.
Sure. Well, unless you have something else you'd like to add, Jody, I really have nothing further. I mean we could go on forever because I could sit here and
I'm on your timeline, so I'm fine.
Okay, yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, giving me your time, and I'm really honored by the fact that you would spend some time with me and talk about your experiences and your book. And we're going to put a link to all your books, all your stuff, the Putt Master. Okay.
Well, I would much appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good day.
Thank you, Jody. Okay.